Okay, so this week is the Parsha of Re'eh. Today we'll be studying an interesting pasuk that discusses the concept of dveikus, to cleave and attach oneself to Hashem. Sounds like a very lofty and abstract concept, and yet, as we explore the psukim that discuss it, the commentaries upon it, we will be able to see how there's some very, very practical applications. So we begin in the Parsha of Re'eh, and first I'll just pluck out one pasuk. This is in Perek Yud Gimel, pasuk Hey. Achrei Hashem Elokeichem Telechu. You should follow Hashem, v'osos tira'u, and Him you should fear. Ves mitzvosav tishmoru, His mitzvos you should observe and keep. V'kolo tishmo, and His voice you should listen to, you should heed. V'oso ta'avodu, and you should worship Him. And this is the key, uvo sidbakun, and to Him you should adhere, you should cleave. So that's what we're going to zero in on. And Rashi gives us a little bit more insight. What does it mean, uvo sidbakun, and to Him you should adhere? So Rashi says like this, had beik bedrachav, you should adhere. When we say ubo sidbaku, to Him you should adhere, you would think you're referring to Hashem Himself. There's some kind of cleaving, there's some kind of attaching to Hashem. So what does that mean precisely in this context? Had beik bedrachav, we're referring to attaching ourselves to Hashem's ways. Gmol chasadim, we should bestow kindness. Kvar mesim, we should bury the dead. Baker cholim, we should visit the sick. Kmosha asa kadosh baruch hu, just like Hashem Himself did. This is a Rashi. It's based on the Talmud in Sota, that we should mimic Hashem's ways, just like Hashem is kind. He buries the dead. He visits the sick. We should do the same. And we'll soon talk about where do we see that Hashem does engages in this type of behavior. But this is what Rashi tells us. Okay, now, what's interesting is that this is not the first time the Torah tells us to adhere, to attach ourselves to Hashem. Just last week in the Parsha, so first of all, we go back 2 weeks ago in the Parsha of Eschanon. We have that famous pasuk that we say when we bring out the Torah, we pronounce Va'atem hadveikim ba'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kolchem hayom. We say that Atem hadveikim, we have that same word, to be davek, to be davuk. We are attached, adhered to Hashem. Over there, Rashi doesn't give any special explanation as to what the significance of that is. And then in last week's parsha, in the parsha of Ekev, in 2 instances, does the word and command to lidabek, to adhere, to attach to Hashem, we find that in the parsha of Ekev. So the first time we see this is in the parsha of Ekev. Let's pull it up here. In Perek Yud Pasuk Chaf, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, Hashem you should fear, also Tavod, Uvo Sidbak, and to Him you must cleave. V'shmo Teshavia, and you should also swear by His name. But we have this idea of Ubo Sidbak. Here Rashi does not say anything. He doesn't give any explanation, no interpretation whatsoever. And then at the end of the parsha of Ekev, in Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Chav Beis, it says, Kim Shomar Tishmor is called mitzvah azos, that if you will always keep all of these commandments, Asher Nech Mitzaveschem Lasoso, that I command you to do, La'av Hashem Lokeichem, to love Hashem, L'laches b'chol derachav, to go in His ways, follow His ways, U'ladavka bo, and to cleave to Him. So here again, in the second appearance in the parsha of Ekev, it says that there's a command, U'ladavka bo, to cleave to Him. Here, Rashi does give an explanation. He says, Uladavka bo, efshar lo makain, can we say that we are going to cleave to Hashem? V'halo eish ochlohu, Hashem is a fiery, burning fire. Elahadbeik b'talmidim. When we say cleave to him, we're referring to the students, uv'chachamim, and to the righteous scholars and sages. Umalani, and I will deem it as if ki'ilu nidbakta bo, as if you have cleaved to Hashem himself. So here we have a whole novel interpretation. We're saying that l'davka bo is referring to, we attach ourselves to the Talmidei Chachamim, to the tzaddikim, and that will, Hashem will deem as if we cleave to him. So we have a number of questions over here. So just to summarize, we have in the Parsha of Eikev twice, it says there's a mitzvah to cleave to him, ubo sidbak, and uladavka bo. 2 times it appears there's a command to cleave to Hashem. And in this week's Parsha in Re'eh, it says ubo tidbakun, and to him you should cleave. So number one, obviously, and the first time there's the command, there's no commentary, there's no further elaboration on Rashi's part. The second time it shows up, there is an explanation, but Ubo Sidbak refers to cleaving to the sages. And in this week's Parsha, when it says Ubo Tidbakun, it's referring to attaching to Hashem's ways. So the question is like this: if does the whole notion of ubod tidbak, to cleave, to attach to Hashem, does that bear explanation? Does it require further clarification? Apparently it does, because we find in 2 instances that Rashi finds it necessary to explain it. But the sequence leaves us scratching our head. In the beginning, the first time the Torah says va'atam adveikim, or it says ubod sidbak, there is no explanation. Then the second time it appears, where it says L'davka bo, Rashi gives an explanation, but refers to the Talmidei Chachamim. And now there's a new explanation, refers to cleaving to Hashem's ways. So if Rashi feels that it needs an explanation, he should have explained it right away in the beginning, where it says Ubo Sidbak, and the first time in Parsha Eikev. If it doesn't need explanation, so why is Rashi explaining the other places? And why does he differentiate? In one place in Eikev, he says refers to the scholars, and here it refers to Hashem's ways. So we need some explanation of what's going on over here, number one. Number two, when we analyze this Rashi in our Parsha, it's where he says that we need to attach to Hashem's ways. Which special actions, deeds, are we to imitate? Over here it mentions 2 specific ones: kavor mesim bakar cholim, to bury the dead and to visit the sick, just like Hashem did. Now, number one, when we look in the Talmud, there are other actions that Hashem, other deeds that Hashem performed that are not mentioned in Rashi. For instance, there is the deed that Hashem performed of malbish arumim. Hashem clothed those who are unclothed. Rashi omits this mitzvah, this special deed that Hashem did. He doesn't mention it here. Why? And also another curious thing is Rashi, the sequence of Rashi. He says, as we know, everything in Rashi is precise and meticulous. He says, kavar mesim bakar cholim, bury the dead and visit the sick. If you were writing a commentary, if you were writing this sentence, how would you write it? You would write, there would be some logical order. Now, what would make sense to write first? Bury the dead or visit the sick? Seemingly, visiting the sick is a step that happens before those who pass on, they are buried. So Rashi should have said bakar cholim, then kavor mesim. Why does Rashi place it in this order? And also, there are other questions, or I'm not going to get into all of them. This is based on a sikha of the Rebbe. And one more question we'll put forward here, and that is, in the Talmud over there, in the Masechta of Sota, it brings proof. For each of the deeds, we look in the Torah, and we could find various mitzvahs, various special deeds that Hashem performed. And the Talmud says, we see Hashem did this deed as it says in this verse. So for example, when it comes to Malbish Harumim, that Hashem gave clothes to those who had no clothes, where do we find that? So I'm sure we all know, it's in the very beginning of the Parsha of Bereshis, after Adam and Chava sinned with a chet eitz hadas, and then they realized that they were unclothed. So it says Hashem gave them kasnas, or vayalbishim, that Hashem actually clothed Adam and Chava. There's Bikur Cholim. Where do we see that Hashem performed the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim? Of course, we know Vayera Hashem el Avram. Hashem appears to Avram on the third day after he performed the bris. He was very ill, and Hashem visits him, Bikur Cholim. There is the mitzvah of Kvura, where we find at the end of the Torah in the Parsha when it talks about the passing of Moshe and V'zos HaBracha, that Hashem buries Moshe. No one else knew where he was, and he was buried by Hashem. So we could perhaps assume that in the two mitzvahs that Rashi does bring, so the Malbish Harumim, we said Rashi didn't bring. We don't know why. Perhaps we'll figure out later. He does mention, however, Kvar Mesim and Bakar Cholim. So Bikur Cholim, perhaps you could say Rashi didn't bring a proof for it because we already learned Parsha Vayera. So in Parsha Vayera, we learned about the Bikur Cholim, and Rashi says he brings Lavakir Sachola. So therefore, perhaps Rashi relies on the fact that everyone knows that the Torah, the clear story of Bikur Cholim. But the Kvura we did not learn about in the Parsha of V'zos HaBracha. So why does Rashi not bring the proof, just like the Gemara brings a proof? So, in summation, what we have here is 3 psukim that talk about the mitzvah of dveikus, of attaching ourselves to Hashem. The first time, Rashi doesn't explain nothing. The second time, he says it refers to the Talmidei Chachamim. And finally, in this week's parsha, he says it refers to following Hashem's ways. So that's the question: why is there an interpretation here, but not in the previous times, and why does the interpretation vary, etc.? Why does Rashi omit some of the mitzvahs that Hashem did? One of them that we also didn't mention is the concept of nichum avelim. It says that in the Parsha of Chayei Sarah, after Avram dies, it says Hashem comes to Yitzchak, vayevarech oso, Hashem blesses him, and in fact, Rashi himself, according to one of the explanations, he says that Hashem comforted him. He gave him, he performed the mitzvah of nichum avelim. So in any case, why does Rashi omit Malbish Harumim and other mitzvahs like that? Why does he pick specifically these two? And also we ask, why is there a sequence of first Kvuras Hames and then Bikur Cholim, and why does he bring no proof to that? So we need to explore this idea of dveikus, this concept of cleaving to Hashem. Now, if we were to look at the first time that it appears, as we mentioned before, it says both Sidbak, Hashem says it says that you should cleave to Hashem. Does that, Rashi doesn't explain anything. So we must say that on the face of it, when we say ledavek, to cleave, to adhere, it's self-explanatory. The Rebbe says a fascinating thing we find in the Parsha Vayishlach, the term which has the same root as davek, ledabek. It says we find when Shem started to have lustful feelings for Dinah, it says vatidbak nafshoi bedina bas Yaakov, that Shem, his soul, vatidbak nafsho vayehav es anayra, and he loved the young maiden. So on the face of it, when we read this verse, when we read the word vatidbak, there was a adhering, and the Torah clarifies vayehav, and he loved. In other words, when we read Pshuto Shel Mikra, the simple literal understanding of the Torah, lidabek, to adhere, means to love. It means there's feelings. So therefore, when the Torah says for the first time, va'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokeichem, or if we say ubo sidbak, on a simple reading, obviously there are deeper and more elaborate explanation, but Rashi is out to explain the literal meaning of the pasuk. So when the Torah says ubo sidbak, Hashem says you should lidabek, we should adhere to him. What we mean in this context here is ahava, to love Hashem. And therefore, the Torah, Rashi doesn't need to explain anything the first time, because when the Torah says ubo sidbak, we mean love of Hashem. Now, that is a good and satisfactory explanation for the first time it is brought the word ubo sidbak. The problem is, it doesn't work for the next time. where it says L'dafka bo, the second time, as we mentioned in the parsha of Ekev, where it says that L'dafka bo, that's at the conclusion of parsha of Ekev in pasuk Chav Beis. The problem is the verse previous, as we mentioned before, it says, Ki shamar tishmar nes mitzvah azos, you should observe this mitzvah. Asher noich mitzvah esam lasos, I command you to do. La'avas Hashem l'kechem, to love Hashem, l'leches b'chol derachav, to go and follow in His ways. L'dafka bo, l'dafka bo. Now we can't say over here dveikus means ava, because already earlier it says la'avas Hashem l'kechem, to love Hashem. Now when it says l'dafka bo, it's something in addition to love. So Rashi needs a new explanation. In this context, l'dafka bo cannot mean ava, as the pasuk already mentions it, and it ends here to add a new mitzvah, a new directive. He has to add something. So what does he say? What could be more than loving Hashem? How can we love Hashem more than we already have in our heart? So thus he explains it refers to Talmidei Chachamim, refers to the Torah scholars. So in other words, the verse itself necessitates Rashi that we look for a different explanation. Earlier in the Parsha of Ekev, and the first time it appears and says about Sidbak, there we say it means Av. But in this verse, where it already says La'avas Hashem l'keichem, and then it says l'dafka bo, and you should cleave. Therefore, there's a new explanation. It means to attach ourselves to Talmidei Chachamim. Now, how about our Parsha? Could we say the same thing? Could we apply the idea of Ava, of love, in this week's Parsha? So what is the context? What is the context in our Parsha where it says the mitzvah ubo sidbakun? The context is the Torah is discussing the concept of a Navi Sheker, the false prophet. Mesis umediach, the person who tries to incite and instigate others to serve idols, worship. So that's the concept of Mesis, Mediach, Navi Sheker. And Hashem goes on to, and the Torah discusses that if you're gonna have a prophet who will come and he'll perform all kinds of miracles, but his whole intention is to subvert and undermine the Torah, you should not listen, not heed the words of that Navi. And the Torah says, why does Hashem allow that there should be a false prophet who will perform all these miracles? It seems that with a person who has such power, it could be so convincing and so persuasive. So the Torah tells us a very important principle. Ki menasa, this is in Perek Yud Pasuk Dalet. Ki menasa Hashem Elokeichem. This is one verse before the command ubo sidbakun. The Torah says, "Lo sishmal on Naviyahu." Don't listen to that Navi. Elocholem hacholam ahu, the person who has a vision, this in his dream. Ki menasa Hashem Elokeichem. Rather, you should know Hashem is testing you. Ladas, to know. Hayishchem oyavim es Hashem Elokeichem. Whether you indeed, in fact, love Hashem, b'chol levavchem b'chol nafshechem, with all your heart and all your soul. Another, the whole purpose, the whole context over here of this discussion about the false prophet and the inciter, the person who tries to get all these Jewish people to serve Avodah Zarah, Hashem is here to see. It's a test. Do you really love Hashem? And the subsequent pasuk, in pasuk Hey, it says, "Achrei Hashem Elokeichem telechu." You should follow Hashem, v'oso siro, as we mentioned before. You should fear Him. V'oso tishmoru. You should observe His commandments. V'kol tishmo, and you should heed His voice. V'oso tavodu, and Him you should serve and worship. Ubo sidbakun, and to Him you should attach. Now, can we say that this verse, that this pasuk ubo sidbakun, the words of ubo sidbakun mean to love Hashem? It can't mean that, because the whole context of it here is talking about that we should love Hashem, and in fact we are tested, and we are really put to our feet to the fire to see, do we truly love Hashem? So with the pasuk now, with the Torah now, one pasuk later starts speaking about a specific detail, ubo sidbakun, as one little detail. You should love Hashem. The whole context, the whole chapter over here is discussing loving Hashem. So therefore, we must come to it. We need right now a different explanation. We can't go back to the concept of Ava, like we said earlier in the parsha of Ekev, based on the understanding in the parsha of Yishlach. We need a new explanation. Now, another interesting thing is in this verse, prior to, if you pay attention, prior to the words of Bosid Bakun, it says, Oso tiro, Hashem you should fear, ves mitzvosav tishmaru, you should follow and observe all the commandments. And then it says, Bosid Bakun. So this is a key to something very, very profound. In other words, what is the Torah saying? Ubosid Bakun is not part of the mitzvahs. Because the Torah already said, Ves mitzvosav tishmaru, you should observe and follow Hashem's commands. That teaches us that when the Torah subsequently says, Ubosid Bakun, it's referring to something in addition to the 613 mitzvahs. It's something very, very different. Because if it was one of the mitzvahs, it's already included in what the Torah says, Ves mitzvosav tishmaru, you should follow Hashem's mitzvahs, which includes all 613. So there's something different. There's something totally new. So Rashi says, we must say over here, when the Torah says to cleave to him, it can't be love. It can't be Talmidei Chachamim. Because over here, we just finished, the Torah is going from one level to the next. You should fear Hashem, observe his mitzvahs, and ubosid bakun. We're on the highest level. We're beyond loving Hashem. We're beyond fulfilling all the commandments. Where the Torah now say, attached to the Talmidei Chachamim, it doesn't fit the context. So rather, how can we truly cleave to Hashem? We could cleave to his ways, but not from the ways of the 613 mitzvahs, something totally different. So Rashi needs to find out, what does he need? What is he looking for? Something that's not a regular command, something that you need to fulfill out of your duty and obligation. Just like we have 613 mitzvahs, we must fulfill them. It's not optional. It's not something that extra credit. You have to do it because this is your duty. This is compulsory. Rather, it's something extracurricular, something different. So Rashi has to look for things that Hashem did, that just like by a person, it's not an absolute duty, but nevertheless a mitzvah. It's something that Hashem himself did in a similar fashion. Where do we find this? So the Rashi mentions two mitzvahs, Bikur Cholim and Kvuras Hames. Bikur Cholim, what was the context of Bikur Cholim? Hashem went to visit Avram. Now, when did Hashem visit him? He visited him on the third day. Ostensibly, others also visited Avram in the first 2 days. His friends, members of his family. True, Hashem came on the third day, and the Torah says he removed the sun from the shield to discourage guests from coming. But that was on the third day when he was at the height of his pain and his illness. But the first 2 days prior, there were others who came to visit him. So in other words, when Hashem visited him, it wasn't that there was nobody else and he was the only one who could do it. In addition to others who fulfilled the mitzvah, Hashem also fulfilled the command. This is similar to the idea that, as we mentioned, we're looking for a mitzvah that's not part of the 613. It's something that's beyond, not something that's forced or compulsory, something that was voluntary. And similarly, we'll find the concept of Kvuras Hames. We ask the question, why does Rashi not bring the verse about Hashem burying Moshe Rabbeinu? Here the Rebbe says an astounding thing. We're not referring to, we conventionally think Hashem did the Kavura. There's only, in the Torah, we only find one place where Hashem buried someone. And that is in the Parsha of V'zos HaBracha, Hashem buries Moshe. The Rebbe says, no, we are not referring to the Kavura of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why not? Because we just said we are talking about a mitzvah that others could have done. Hashem wasn't the only one, and therefore, when he does the mitzvah, it's like beyond the normative, beyond the required. Hashem had to bury Moshe Rabbeinu because we know the Torah says, "V'layada ishes kfurasa." Nobody knew where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. The location of his kavura remains a mystery till this very day. Therefore, nobody else was able to or allowed to bury Moshe Rabbeinu. It had to remain a secret. And therefore, the Rebbe says Moshe Rabbeinu was like a meis mitzvah. There was nobody else to bury him. Hashem had to bury him in order for the secret to remain safe. So therefore, Rashi cannot be referring to the burial of Moshe Rabbeinu. If so, who are we talking about? If it's not Moshe Rabbeinu, who did Hashem bury? So the Rebbe says, we are referring to the Kavura of Aaron. We're referring to the burial of Aaron, Moshe Rabbeinu's brother. We read about it in last week's parsha, the parsha of Ekev, about the death of Aaron, right? Juxtaposed to the breaking of the Luchos. Rashi tells us that the burial of the death of the tzaddikim is akin to the shattering of the Luchos. And we know that who was there? There were two people that were present at Aaron's passing. There was Moshe and Elazar, his son. Now, the Torah tells us that after Aaron passes, they descended from the mountain. So they didn't bury him. And the Rebbe says it's possible. Why didn't they bury him? Because Elazar was a Kohen Gadol, who's not allowed to become Tameh even to immediate family, as well as Moshe. If you recall, we discussed a few weeks ago that Moshe Rabbeinu also had the designation of a Kohen Gadol for the services that he did in inaugurating the Mishkan. So they weren't allowed to bury Aaron. And in fact, we know that nobody else was present. We learn in the Parsha of Chukas, Rashi tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu and Elazar descend from the mountain, they said, "Where's Aaron?" And they said he passed away, and they didn't believe it. And until Moshe Rabbeinu was able to present to them in the image of a malach who was carrying Aaron on a bed to indicate that he had indeed passed. So none other of the Bnei Yisrael were there. The truth is, others could have buried him. Anybody else besides Moshe and Elazar could have buried Aaron. But we know that they didn't do it, and nobody else did it because no one else was present. So we must say that Hashem buried Aaron. But there is a difference here. When it comes to Moshe, there was no other choice. Hashem had to bury. When it comes to Aaron, others could have buried. But Hashem did it anyways. So here, Rashi is alluding to the burial of Aaron as the special Gemilas Chesed that Hashem did. So, to summarize, we had the question, why does Rashi not explain? Why does he not explain in the earlier parsha of Ekev what dveikus means? And we explained over there it means ava, it means love. In our parsha, we can't say it means love because the whole context, the whole discussion revolving around the Bosid Bakun, the introduction to that is the false prophets and the insiders, which Hashem introduces into our lives in order to test the metal of our love. So Bosid Bakun has to be referring to something else. It can't refer to a specific mitzvah because that verse already says, Ves mitzvos tishmaru, you have to observe the mitzvah. So it's talking about something else. It's something in addition to the normative mitzvah that we perform, which is out of a sense of duty and compulsion. We are something that we are compelled to do. Rashi omits the mitzvah of Malbish Harumim. We had that question. Again, based on what we said before, Rashi does not mention Malbish Harumim. Why? Because Adam and Chava, as we mentioned, we're talking about mitzvahs that Hashem, others could have done, but Hashem did it anyways. Who could have clothed Moshe, Adam and Chava? There was nobody else to do it. And the concept of clothing, of providing someone clothes, is essential. It's a very, very important mitzvah. We find in the Parsha of Mishpatim, when a person takes a collateral security from a person, if you take an article of clothing from a poor person, the Torah says you need to return it to them. If it's a night garment in the nighttime and the day garment, you have to return it to them. Even though that's your security, that's your collateral, because that person will be left without their clothes that they need. We see this idea that providing clothes is essential. And to Adam and Chava, if Hashem didn't provide them the clothing, no one else would. So therefore, since it was something that was vital, essential, and no one else was able to do it, it does not fit the context of what Rashi is trying to explain here, which is that Hashem does mitzvahs that are something that others could have done anyways, but he did it, and we are to imitate that. So therefore, both Malbish Arumim, the mitzvah of Malbish Arumim, does not belong here. Another question we had was, why does the order Bikur Cholim come after Kvuras Hames? So the Rebbe says over here, since we are talking about something that it's a mitzvah that we accept upon ourselves, not something that we have to do. Therefore, we mention things that go from something that's more benign to something that's more severe. So, for example, Kvuras Hames, it's something that is involved, that entails much toil and effort. A person to bury a person, it's not something that happens so easily. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. However, it's not necessarily associated with, there's not too much risk involved. By contrast, when you go to visit someone who's sick, over there, it's a mitzvah, there's effort, you need to go visit them, but also there could be a certain measure of danger associated, that you could contract the illness. As we know today, with all of the contagion and transmissibility, that we have to be very, very careful when we visit someone who's very, very sick. So therefore, Rashi first brings kavura, something that is not dangerous per se, although it can be, but it's not on the same degree when a person who's sick and you're going to such close proximity. So first he mentions kavura, which requires effort, but is not dangerous. And then it goes to the more severe level, the more involved level, which is the level of hardship of Bikur Cholim, which there's effort as well as danger. But he does not mention Nichum Avelim. And that was the other question, answers the other question. Why does it not mention Nichum Avelim? Because Nichum Avelim does not require effort. It does not the way of Kvuras Hames, and there's no danger that is posed to the person like Bikur Cholim. So therefore, we mention merely Bikur Cholim and Kvuras Hames, and we extrapolate from that. Certainly, we would have to do Nichum Avelim, something that requires a minimal amount of effort and little risk. So this, in a sense, is the more involved and more technical explanation of Rashi. And just to give a brief summary, the pasuk over here, Ubosid Bakun, when it says we cleave to Hashem, Rashi says it refers to cleaving to Hashem's ways. Hashem, we find, has done things that are not actually clearly required, because there are others that could do a mitzvah, whether it was Bikur Cholim, like in the case of Avram, whether it is the burial of Aaron, where others were able to do it, not like by Moshe, no one else was able to do it. Here, other people were able to do it, but no one else was present. Hashem arranged that it was only Moshe and Elazar who were not allowed to bury Aaron, but Hashem chose out of Gemilas Chesed to bury Aaron. So, in summation, what we have here is a fascinating thing. The takeaway is, when we talk about a Bosid Bakun in this pasuk in our parsha, that when we say you should adhere to Hashem's ways, we mentioned that earlier it says Ves mitzvos tishmaru, you should fulfill and observe Hashem's 613 mitzvos. So now, if we say after we already said that you should fulfill all of Hashem's commandments, and then it says you should follow Hashem's ways, Bosid Bakun, obviously we're talking about a more developed, more advanced, a more sublime level of connecting to Hashem. Now, here is the big question. How could that be? We know that mitzvahs, the word mitzvah means commandment, but also comes from the word savta, which means attachment and connection, which means every single mitzvah inherently is ubosid bakun, is attachment, is cleaving to Hashem, because that's what mitzvah means, savsa v'chibur. As Chassidus explains, through every mitzvah, we have the opportunity to attach ourselves, to connect ourselves to Hashem. So therefore, if every mitzvah is so profound, what exactly are we talking about? That there's something that is even greater than a mitzvah. How could it be ubosid bakun, attaching ourselves to Hashem's ways, to visit, to do something that is beyond the mitzvah? A regular mitzvah, Hashem tells you to do something. He says, keep Shabbos, keep kosher. This is actually a command from Hashem. I want you to do this. I need you to do this. You must do this. And you do what you have to do. You attach yourself to Hashem. So what exactly is the greater level than that? That we say you're doing something that you didn't even have to do, meaning others could do it, and you decided to do it anyways. We're going to say that is a greater attachment to Hashem. How do we understand this? The Rebbe explains that in truth, by virtue of the fact that we say there's something called mitzvah. Mitzvah means commandment. We are already talking about two parties. There's the person who issues the command, the mitzaveh, and then there's the mitzvah, the one who is the commandee, the person who's the recipient, the person who's receiving the commandment. Hashem says, I want you to keep Shabbos. There's Hashem, who's issuing the command. And then there is the person who Hashem is commanding upon. I want you to observe the Shabbos. I want you to keep kosher, etc. So true, through fulfilling the command, you fulfill Hashem's wish, and you create that connection with Hashem. But ultimately, what we're saying is there's a system of relativity here. There is the mitzaveh, there's the mitzvah, there's the person who gives the command, there's the person who receives the command. There are two separate entities. One is commanding the other, and the other is fulfilling the command of the mitzvah, of the person who is the commander. So at the end of the day, as much as you attach yourself, there's ultimately two entities. There's Hashem and there's the person. However, when we talk about cleaving to Hashem, in this context, to follow his ways, what we're saying is not that Hashem commands you to do so. It's not a mitzvah. As we mentioned before, it's beyond the 613. It's something that Hashem is saying, Ubosid bakun. What's the command? The command is not what to do. The command is what is supposed to happen. The command is attach yourself. How do you do it? You pick this mitzvah, you pick that mitzvah. Hashem is not telling you to do this specific thing. There's a general notion to attach yourself to Hashem. So ultimately, since there is no specific command, there's no two entities. There's no Hashem and the person. There is one thing. You are attached to Hashem. So you and Hashem become one. We once spoke about this concept about the when it came to Nadav and Avihu, that they offered this Eish Zara Asher Lo Tziva Hashem, a fire that Hashem did not command. And we spoke about how this idea, the Rebbe in another Sikha speaks about this concept that there is the command, just like in a relationship, there are things I tell you to do. Please do this, please do that, please don't do that. And then there are things that I don't need to tell you anything. You know that this is what I want, and you do it, and you do it without needing being told. So there's an intuition. There's something that you intuitively know this is what you want me to do. And therefore, yes, on the surface, if I do what you want, that's great. If I don't do what you don't want, it's also great because you know that I don't want you to do this. But what's if I do something that I know you want me to do? Or let's say I do something that I know you don't want me to do, but you never told me. So you could say, you can't blame me. You never said not to do it. But you know that this person doesn't want you to do it. So sometimes the things that are not said is a much deeper, much more profound relationship. When you do without being told, that shows that you are really connected. If you do what you're told, you only did it because you're told. That means there's a me, there's you, and you told me to do something. But if I do without being told, that means we're both one. I know what you want, and I do it because I know, not because you told me to do it, because I know you want me to do it. The Rebbe brings a fascinating story of the Alter Rebbe and Reb Hillel Paritcher. It is known that it's brought down in many Kabbalistic works that there's a very special time, Erev Shabbos, at even just as Shabbos begins, on Shabbos evening, Friday night, there's a very, very special Kabbalistic energy at that time. And it says that it's associated with the concept of, in Kabbalistic vernacular, it's known as Dormita de Zah, the slumber of Zah. It's an involved, complicated Kabbalistic idea associated with, at the very beginning of creation, on the sixth day of creation, when after Adam was born, and the creation of Chava, and Adam fell asleep, and they removed part of Adam to create Chava. So this idea is this energy is reenacted every week on the Friday night, and it's known as the slumber of some of the supernal spheros of the that exist within the spiritual realms. In any case, it's a complicated Kabbalistic idea, but briefly, it's associated with the concept of sleep. And it says that the Alter Rebbe would, around that time, he would fall asleep Friday evening, right? It's in the period of time between Mincha and Kabbalah Shabbos. He would fall asleep. Now, he had a chassid whose name was Reb Hillel Paritcher, who was also a very, very great chassid. He was in fact known, he was like considered like a half a Rebbe. He himself was a very, very scholarly and spiritual, and himself, he would teach Hasidic discourses and so on. He knew about this Kabbalistic ritual, and he would go to sleep. He would lay down also Friday evening around this time, because he knew that this time was this energy of spiritual slumber, and it was a Kabbalistic ritual that he would go to sleep. However, there was a major distinction between the Alter Rebbe and Reb Hillel Paritcher. Reb Hillel Paritcher, as opposed to the Alter Rebbe would fall, he wouldn't have to lay down in bed and go to sleep. He would actually, naturally, without doing anything, he would fall asleep. He would be overcome with a fatigue and exhaustion. He would fall asleep for a short period of time. It wasn't a long, full night's sleep. It was a little dozing off, so to speak. Reb Hillel Paritcher, it was different. He would actually have to lay down. He would get into bed, he would lay down, go to sleep, and then he would wake up. What was the difference between the two? The difference was, this is explained in one of the talks of the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. He says that the Alter Rebbe, what's the difference between the Alter Rebbe and Reb Hillel Paritcher? The Alter Rebbe, he had a very, very sublime, exalted soul, the soul of Atzilot, of the world of emanation, which, in other words, the Alter Rebbe, everything that he did down here, he wasn't detached, so to speak, from the spiritual reality. Everything he did down here in this world was because his soul and body were in sync with the spiritual reality. So in other words, everything that happened in the spiritual realms manifested down here in this physical world. So therefore, automatically, it was a time of sleep and slumber in the celestial and the supernal realms. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe, all of a sudden, naturally and automatically, he fell asleep down here in this world. Reb Hillel Paritcher, it's different. He didn't have the same synchronization. He didn't have that same alignment the way the Alter Rebbe had, which we're talking about as something, it's very, very, something we can't even understand. Alter Rebbe, he basically, everything he did in this world was totally in lockstep, because he was living here in this world the way things were in the spiritual realms. Reb Hillel Paritcher, he merely knew, he had the knowledge that it's time for slumber in the spiritual realms. And therefore, he had to lay down because he had to do whatever was happening in that world. But it didn't happen automatically. So this is sort of, the Rebbe brings the story to illustrate the difference between a mitzvah, that is of the 613 mitzvahs, and then this relationship that we have, not being commanded, not being told what to do, but rather, because I'm connected, automatically I do. Reb Hillel Paritcher, it's like one of the mitzvahs. There's Hashem, there's a spiritual reality. And I want to do what's right and what's commanded, and therefore I do it. But it's not something that happens automatic. It's not something that, because it exists in the spiritual world, I'm forced to, I have to do it. You have to train yourself. You have to make a decision and say, I am going to do something. Because at the end of the day, I am my own self-autonomous entity and living in my own reality. The Alter Rebbe, since he was davuk, since he was attached, he was one with Hashem. So therefore, he didn't need to lay down. Right now, I'm going to go lay down because this is what's to happen. It automatically happens because since you're one with Hashem, and since this is what's happening in the spiritual realms, it will manifest itself without any effort, it's something that's inevitable, that it will happen here in this world. Now, this sounds like a very, 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 very profound and, in fact, almost unattainable level. But we know there's a fascinating teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. There's a pasuk we know in Tehillim, in the Shir Hamalos, Esa Einai El Harim Me'ayin Yavi Yezri. We know that famous kapitel in Tehillim. And one of the verses over there says, Hashem Tzilcha. We talk about the comfort to know that Hashem is our shadow. Hashem is always with us, right? The literal meaning is that Hashem is there. He is always protecting us. But there's a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov which literally turns this teaching, the simple meaning of the verse on its head. What do we mean that Hashem is our shadow? Not that Hashem is there, there's some kind of layer of protection. Not only that, which is the simple meaning, but in fact, there's a mechanism that's just like a shadow. Just like when down here in this terrestrial world, the shadow of a person, the way it works is that we go about doing our business. We do certain things, we make certain gestures, certain actions, and all of our actions and any movement and motion that we do. So then the shadow mimics, it reflects everything that we do is reflected in the shadow. So we move our hand right, there will be a shadow of a hand moving in that direction, and so on and so forth. And how does it happen? It happens automatically. Whenever I move in a certain direction, the shadow will do the same thing. So too, the Baal Shem Tov says that everything that we do down here in this world, there's such a profound, this in the capital of Tilm, I believe it's 121, Shir HaMailos in capital 120. That verse in that capital of Tilm. So too, every action that we take down here in this world is so powerful. There's the infinite power that we have, that when we do something down here in this world, this is reflected also in the spiritual worlds. Hashem is our shadow. That is to say, when I do something positive, when I do something down here in this world, Hashem mimics our actions up there in the spiritual worlds, just like a shadow. I daven, I learn, I say a kind word, I do a mitzvah. That is not just done up there in the spiritual world, but it happens automatically, just like a shadow. You don't have to command it, you don't have to order it and manipulate it. It happens the same instant, automatically. When we do it, same too. When we do something down here in this world, it happens in the spiritual realms. So the Rebbe says, just like it works from down up, from here, Hashem is our shadow, that whatever we do down here, we create our energy, we create our reality. In other words, what's the profound teaching of Hashem Tzilcha? Hashem is our shadow, that we create whatever we decide, whatever we want to be, we create our energy, we create our reality. You don't like your reality, you don't like that energy, change it, because it'll be like a shadow. You don't like that the right hand in the shadow is moving, you want it to be the left, just move your left hand. The left hand shadow will move. You don't want it to be your hand, you want it to be your leg, you decide. And the shadow will automatically follow along. So too, there's something about our lives. We say, I don't like, I'm speaking this way, I'm thinking this way, I'm doing this thing. All you have to do, Hashem is telling us, is decide what you want, and I am your shadow. So that is the way things operate from down up. From down here in this world, we change the reality up there. But then we come to the second step, the step of Ubosid Bakun, that it also works the other way around. Ubosid Bakun, as we mentioned, is not like one of the regular mitzvahs, mitzvahs of Tishmaru, one of the 613. We're talking about beyond that. We're talking about the mitzvahs that we do, not being commanded, we do it because this is what Hashem did, we do also. It's the higher level, it's the attachment, not being commanded, but rather we intuitively do what we know Hashem wants. So now, what happens then? It's like the Alter Rebbe falling asleep. Because up there in the spiritual realms, there's a certain reality, whatever happens by Hashem will automatically filter down here. Now, that of course is a very, very lofty goal. But we have to remember, just like we are able to change from down here, the reality up there, if we align ourselves, if we attach ourselves to Hashem's ways, then ultimately, whatever happens up there, we become the shadow down here. That whatever Hashem does up there, whatever positive energy is pulsating and vibrating in the spiritual realms, then it filters down here, because as we know, each and every one of us have the neshama, the nefesh elokis, the chelek elokam mamash, the veritable part of Hashem, which is truly infinite, untainted, and one with Hashem. So this ultimately brings out the greatest connection we have to Hashem, that our neshama feels that connection. And whenever there's something happening in the spiritual realms, it filters down here. So ultimately, the takeaway in summation, we have a pasuk that tells us, Ubosid Bakan, that we need to cleave to Hashem. As we mentioned over here, this talks about Rashi. It seems very, very simple. Bury the dead, visit the sick. But as we learn through this discussion, we're talking about not just a regular mitzvah of the Torah, but rather, in addition and above to mitzvahs of Tishmaru, to the regular 613, we're talking about mitzvahs that are not compulsory. It's not something we're commanded to do. Other people could perform it. But since we want to do everything that is the way Hashem does it, we want it to mirror in our lives. We do something that's beyond the call of duty. So Hashem says, there's one level, you fulfill everything I tell you to do. I tell you to go here, I tell you to do this mitzvah, shake this lulav, blow the shofar, do all these things. And it's good. You're fulfilling the mitzvahs. That's great. But then there's a next step. The step over here is, I don't tell you, you know intuitively, you know that there's something very, very special about doing these mitzvahs, because now you're connecting yourself not just to what I'm told to do, but you're connecting yourself to a reality. When you live your life, that every aspect, every detail, you want to mirror the spiritual reality, then what will happen is everything in your life will become saturated with purpose, with meaning, and therefore you remember that every deed that you do, every action that you take is significant. Just like the shadow, in the same metaphor, the shadow, every single thing gets reflected. There's no, you make a bunch of motions and we just see one or two things. Ultimately, every single detail, every aspect, every maneuver that you do becomes reflected and is mimicked by the shadow. So therefore, Hashem is telling us every single action that we take is significant. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too inconsequential. And therefore, we are meticulous about all the things that we do, the words that we say, the thoughts that we think as well become reflected in that shadow. And therefore, Hashem says, Kamayim apanul panim, we mirror our actions and project them to Hashem. Hashem, in return, reflects that energy back to us, and comes to us with greater measure of blessing, of brachas, and all the things that we need in our lives. So may it be Hashem's will indeed that we are very conscientious of all the things that we do, and the good things that we do indeed should become reflected back to us multifold in many, many ways, in all the things that we ask for. May Hashem give us all the greatest blessing, the coming of Mashiach. May we merit speedily in our days. B'meher of Yameinu. Amen.